Here's a movie that sucks about a vampire who doesn't want to. Is that pithy enough for you? No? Alright, fine, here we go. Did you know there's such a thing as Christian teen romance novels? It's basically the romanticism of blue balls, but whatever you want to call it, it's selling. Now, consciously or not, Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series takes the basic formula of this one hokey subgenre and imposes it onto the even hokier subgenre of vampire softcore, resulting in a franchise that's seduced so many tween-age girls Chris Hansen ought to be interrogating it in somebody's kitchen. Now it comes to theaters, so that fans everywhere can experience the woozy thrills of having a schoolgirl crush on a violent bipolar stalker and heavy-handed moralizing in all their big-screen glory. Robert Pattinson, whom you may recall leaving absolutely no impression on you whatsoever as Cedric Diggory in the Harry Potter movies, has the allegedly male lead as Edward Cullen, a perpetually teenage vampire who's lusted after by Kristen Stewart's Bella, a name which, I'm told, is apparently not the cheesy vampire pun it initially sounds like. What do you know? Bella is the new kid in a constantly overcast coastal town, and she falls hard for Edward about 5 minutes after hooking up with the mandatory Baskin-Robbins assortment of racially mixed school chums. There's also some Indians who I think are supposed to be werewolves, and if that was supposed to be a surprise, then this franchise is going to be even more painful than I think it is. Now, see, Edward is part of a whole fucking family of friendly bloodsuckers whose strategy for staying hidden from humanity mainly involves living in the stupidest city in the history of vampire movies. The Cullens all look, act, and talk just like the Hot Topic version of the undead that they are, and everyone notices that they say, skip school when it's sunny, don't eat, don't drink, but no one other than Bella manages to figure anything out. Once she has, she proceeds to do what most girls her age do when confronted with a moody, self-involved, verbally abusive, physically dangerous, yet somehow wounded-seeming pretty boy. She immediately declares her eternal love and devotion and subsumes her entire individual being into a codependent relationship, which, come to think of it, is about the most realistic thing anyone does in this movie, and people wonder why I'm a cynic about romance, huh? This, then, is where the unsubtle and much-publicized abstinence metaphor comes in, though since Meyer also happens to be a conservative practicing Mormon, I suppose it works as an unsubtle metaphor for any mind-altering pleasurable practice. Edward and Bella really want to make like Vlad and Mina, see, but, oh, it's dangerous, he might get excited, he might bite her, that's forever, you can never get unbit, best to wait. Isn't that awesome and noble, how they wait? Subtle, huh? What strange times we live in, when the biggest literary franchise apparently on the planet can apparently be handily summarized as Mormon vampire abstinence porn. Thing is, I'm not even sure the moral metaphor here even works. Neither one of these chuckleheads makes any kind of decision during the film. He just broods and seethes until the most boring villain in the history of cinema shows up to give him something to pummel and blow off steam with, while she just mopes around begging to have her throat torn out so she can join the children of the night, since, as we all know, there's no better time to make lasting life decisions than when you're a horny teenager. Forget being badly written, poorly acted, moralistic, and just plain dumb. The biggest crime of this film is boredom. Nothing happens for 90 fucking minutes, and then the one-note bad guys show up and it's over. I was so bored I spent most of the movie wondering how Edward gets his hair gel and man makeup right with no reflection. As it turns out, these are more of those everything you know about vampires is wrong vampires, and they do have reflections. What they don't have is fangs, invisibility, bat transformations, or any of the stuff that used to make vampires fun. Hell, they don't even explode in the sun. Instead, it just makes them shiny. No, really, that's what happens. The vampires fucking glitter. I'm actually at a loss to keep describing how bad this movie is. It plays out like watching a community theater production of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, adapted and directed by Sarah Palin. Folks, I'm no stranger to bad movies, not by a long shot, but having to watch this movie is the most pain I've experienced at the hands of something beloved by preteen girls since I got kicked in the nuts by a pony. Do not see this. Do not give these people your money. If the choice is between Twilight or urinary infection, I suggest you buy that infection a bouquet and chocolates and say thank you, sir, for not being Twilight. So yeah, a compilation of the Twilight reviews. Why did this take so long to get up? For a while, two reasons. One, for a long time I thought sincerely that this was going to end up being one of the four or five of the, classic quote-unquote reviews that we were going to have to go back and really, explain and do a lot of, hey, it was a different time stuff about, more so than there actually was, because really, shitting on Twilight in
aggressively negative ways was basically a pastime for internet critics back in the day when I started out. I'm pretty sure that this was the first review that went up. This was before Escape to the Movies had branding. This was originally posted, like, tagged onto the end of an early video on the old site as like a tryout thing for, hey, we're thinking that this guy should be a film critic on the website. What do you think, guys? And it's not so much that I disagree with my own opinion retroactively of the Twilight movies. They're garbage. I'm not a fan of the books. I'm not a fan of the style. I'm not a fan of the message, the subtextual philosophy, ideology within them. I still don't think Stephenie Meyer, particularly great writer, not a fan of, as YA authors go, being a less shitty person than J.K. Rowling is kind of a low bar to jump over. So I remain no longer the biggest fan of the style that I'm working from in this first review, in this original Twilight review, where it's 90% negativity and dialed up how many angry things can be said about the cast, about the characters, about the material in the nastiest way. This very early YouTube style, but the viewpoint under it, I more or less stand behind. There's a couple jokes and references out because not the way that I would speak about a working actor today. We're talking about Robert Pattinson's, physical appearance, putting on this resentful reviewer persona of threatened by male actors that women find more attractive than you think. That is just not funny to me anymore. But overall, I thought, looking back, remembering the sort of things that were just commonplace in humor parlance for dorky white men like myself to throw into a comedy bit, even in a review context, about the Twilight movies, there was a lot less that gave me pause than I would have remembered. Not to say that I went easy on it, but that I was a lot less of an asshole about this than I remember. So not something that I would still consider my finest work, but still a time capsule. And as such, made me think, well, I may as well put all of these together. One thing to prepare yourselves for is that the other reason that this took so long to get together, we never were able to recover a good video copy of the original version of the Breaking Dawn Part 2 review. That seems to be lost to internet history thanks to poor archiving on my part, poor archiving on the part of the original website that ran these. What I was able to recover was the original audio that I recorded, which I restored, added to a new edit of clips on top of that. So you have the audio of that with a new visual arrangement to get onto the end of this so that you can hear what I did think of Breaking Dawn Part 2. Normally, I would just leave off a missing video from a compilation like this with an explanation of that, but as I remembered, the payoff to this and the sort of turnaround that I had on the final installment of the Twilight Saga is what made a compilation worth doing in the first place, so I wanted to get it on there in some form. But now, having watched the first of these, here is New Moon.
Spanning 4 books and presumably 2 more movies, there's no denying that Stephenie Meyer's Twilight franchise is a full-blown phenomenon. The biggest work of genre fiction to be aimed primarily at young girls since, I can't even remember when, to be honest with you. The sheer magnitude of its popularity, coupled with the fascinating psychosexual implications churning beneath its surface, render it easily one of the most interesting pop culture diversions in recent memory. Too bad it sucks. Look, I'm a professional, so I'm obligated to at least try and find something insightful and fresh to say, but when you get right down to it, the whole thing is just awful. Bad books made into worse movies. Period. Stephenie Meyer, in my opinion, is one hair shy of a straight-up hack, or at least not especially good at her chosen profession. Her style is flat and dull, her plots are formula stacked on cliches, stacked on bullshit, and her characters are the definition of one-dimensional. The first movie ported all that over and added the further delights of terrible acting and static paint-by-numbers direction, and the unforgivable atrocity of inflicting Robert Pattinson on a world that has done nothing to warrant such punishment. Now, before you ask, yes, I read the books. And you know what? New Moon was the only one I came close to liking, mostly because its storyline, more or less reproduced in the new film, involves making Edward disappear for almost the whole damn thing. Taking off for parts unknown out of fear for the safety of his pathologically self-immolating, codependent dumb of a girlfriend, Bella. With the least likable leading man in modern literature out of the picture, Meyer actually took a step toward getting some mileage out of her initial motif, the reworking of supernatural creatures into high school romance archetypes. To that end, Bella nuzzles up to previously platonic buddy Jacob, who also happens to be a werewolf, for those of you who missed all those oh-so-subtle hints in Part 1. Though not before a brief run of suicidal depression, since after all this is Twilight. And Bella wouldn't be Bella if she didn't wind up helpless, bloodied, beaten, cooing "Thank you, sir, may I have another" to the nearest dominant male. Good lord, do I hate this series. But whatever, at least now I can somewhat locate the reference point for this. The vampire is the slick, sophisticated guy, the werewolf is the butch, blue-collar guy, the girl can only pick one, and so on. It's Archie with inverted genders and recast with monsters. Alright, that I can more or less get my head around. Plus the vampires mostly have a kind of European thing going on, while the werewolves are all Native Americans, so there's kind of a racial, cultural thing happening. Alright, you know what? You could probably make a good movie out of that. I mean, they didn't, but, you know, I guess you could. Thanks to Pattinson's inexplicably large fan base and the copious use of flashbacks and dream sequences, Edward ends up in the movie way more than in the book, thus removing the only thing I was looking forward to about this installment. And of course, since when he leaves he takes Ashley Greene with him, it means I've got nothing to look at for 2 hours even. The only other big new thing on hand is the introduction of the Volturi, a bunch of vampire aristocrats who will serve the franchise as big bads from here on out. Like everything else in the series, they're a teetering tower of unimaginably rehashed ideas, but at least it's nice to finally get some vampires who act like f***ing vampires. Plus there's the fun casting of Hollywood's one-time Mr. and Mrs. Go-To spooky kid, Cameron Bright and Dakota Fanning, as two of the heavy hitters. Taylor Lautner actually acquits himself quite decently as Jacob. He's a good actor, and he's got more charisma than anyone else in the cast, which is to say he has charisma. He exudes, if not necessarily range, at least the sense that if his career survives contact with this series, he might have a strong future in the world of B-level action movies, or maybe a cop show. If nothing else, Jacob is by far the only character in the series I could describe as tolerable. Winner by default, I guess. The best thing that can be said is that the cinematography is actually really good, so while there's still nothing worth caring about going on, at least it's all very well photographed nothing. And while the effects are still terrible, especially the laughably phony-looking werewolves, but you know what's really starting to hack me off about this crap? The growing sense of what it's going to do to Kristen Stewart's career. In everything else, she's actually proven to be a pretty damn fine young actress, but the Twilight movies are going to be hanging around her neck like a giant "don't take me seriously" sign for like a decade or more. Oh, and did I mention that it's over 2 hours long? Seriously, this takes 130 minutes to tell. I'm leaving. I'm sad now. I'm here, though. I'm slightly less sad now. I'm back. Now I'm sad. And it's not like they're wrapping stuff up. There's 2 more movies to get through.
Yeah, I think I did not mention in the follow-up modern audio from the last part that one thing that I did get wrong at the time, which I have to own. I think there's a few instances throughout this where we were still referring to the indigenous characters in the series as Indian rather than Native Americans or indigenous peoples, and that's not cool. Generally not something that I would be, not how I'd be using that phraseology today. Obviously, in hindsight, it's interesting to look back on this whole franchise in general, and recognize that a lot of people, myself included, straight up had it pegged wrong about Robert Pattinson. Clearly a better actor than this series gave him credit for. Been good in many, many other things. Obviously, no one needs to tell anyone that everyone had Kristen Stewart completely misunderstood and misidentified from how good she is, and what a complete night and day turn she has been as a dramatic actress, comedy actress, etc. post these films and into the rest of her career. Sometimes you get these things wrong, and that is a lesson. But I stand by the overall appraisal that the franchise is not very good.
Okay, so there's this vampire chick. She's got a grudge against this other vampire for killing her mate. To get revenge, she's made herself a big-ass army of psycho vampire slaves and sent them off to make big-ass vampire war on the good guy. Fortunately, the good guy's girlfriend has another friend who happens to be a werewolf, so he and all his werewolf buddies team up to help the good vampires fight the bad ones in full-on monster versus monster war. So why does this suck? Well, because this is Twilight, where the vampires are whiny emo brats, the werewolves are musclehead lunks, the romantic leads have no chemistry, the emotional psyche is arrested somewhere between Taylor Swift lyrics and a Cliff Notes of the Bell Jar, the monsters are never ever scary, and anything remotely interesting is forbidden from occurring by law. After all, anything interesting might get in the way of the franchise's all-important mission of teaching an entire generation of young women that being willful and independent will only make them moody and miserable, and that true salvation can only be found in codependent submission to emotionally domineering men in the context of traditional marriage. Story-wise, Eclipse manages the impressive feat of being totally pointless even compared to the other Twilight movies. Aside from the impending attack by vampire swarm, the whole thrust of the narrative is giving over to rehashing the Edward Bella Jacob love triangle, except they already resolved it last time. Remember, or maybe hopefully not, they already did all this. She picked the vampire, he proposed, story over. But since the only real energy the series has comes from fueling the teen girl fantasy of being fought over by supernatural studs, they do the same dance all over again. And at this point, it's not even fun to watch how obviously the two leads seem to hate being in the damn thing, almost as much as I hate having to watch it. So it's 2 hours of Taylor Lautner standing around not getting the message, briefly interrupted by sad excuse for a monster battle. I mean, take a look at this clip. Let's see that a few times. Yeah, this is our big creature versus creature war. This doesn't look like a battle. It looks like a bunch of douchebag hipsters messing around in a dog park. Hey, wait, watch this. I'll edit a frisbee into the scene. See? See how that almost looks like it belongs there?
Well, it shouldn't.
In any case, the film does come with the series' first real instance of fandom-splitting controversy. After some pretty crummy-sounding backstage shenanigans, the producers went and replaced Rachel Lefevre, who played the bad vampire Victoria in the first two movies, with Bryce Dallas Howard for this one. Now that sucks for Lefevre, who put a lot of work into the series, but also for Howard, who's way too good an actress to be hanging around in a f***ing Twilight movie. Either way, if you're not looking for it, you probably won't even notice, since Victoria is barely in the movie. She has like maybe 10 minutes total screen time. Speaking of talented people wasting their time, this installment has been directed by one David Slade, who made the spectacular Hard Candy and the pretty decent 30 Days of Night. He's a natural-born horror director with a great gift for mood and action, and even he can't do anything to salvage Stephenie Meyer's treacly, mascot-driven abstinence lecture. You know, it's easy to rag on Twilight for its horrible story, writing, acting, characters, but that's all superficial. If this was just the modern equivalent to V.C. Andrews schlock, I'd be even tempted to say that the hatred has gotten out of control and it's not really worth the effort, but at least for me, there really is something uglier that seems to be underpinning all of this. Look, I'm not someone who's all about attacking things for their message. You should be able to make a movie with any message you want, and I think it's a slippery slope when people start complaining that Call of Duty is going to turn little boys into gun nuts, or that the Bratz dolls were bad role models, or whatever. But even I'm sincerely creeped out by what Twilight seems to be drilling into the heads of its young female fans. I mean, guys, look, these are the 3 overriding messages of the Twilight books. Marry as early as you can. Stalking equals love, and the most important thing about you is virginity. And you know what? In that respect, I was wrong. Twilight, the phenomenon at least, is scary.
Yeah, a lot less edits here in Eclipse, mainly because this is when the franchise, the middle ones are really when it just kind of started getting regular, bad, boring. When we just sort of accepted, okay, this is now no longer a novelty, this is a new thing, it's part of the culture, and it just sort of It's still weird that David Slade did this one. It doesn't feel, even looking back, like he's gone on to really refine himself as a solid journeyman horror director, and like, what even is this from him? Bryce Dallas Howard obviously has gone on to be a much more interesting filmmaker, much more interesting actress, but now on into the last of the actual episodes.
You know, at this point, it almost feels pointless. As a phenomenon, Twilight seems to have peaked a couple of years ago, amazingly right around the same time that the young women who fell under its spell in junior high are graduating high school. And now that it no longer comes packaged as part of some omnipresent pop cultural juggernaut, there doesn't seem to be as much cause to once again drag its worthless corpse over the coals. Unless, of course, you know, it actually starts getting worse again. Fortunately, that's what happens. Breaking Dawn is regarded as the Twilight book that even the Twilight fans didn't like. It's the point where the series stops being a melodramatic high school romance ostensibly featuring vampires, and becomes a more conventionally terrible fantasy horror story where all the yearning and brooding and heavy sighing steps aside for pointlessly convoluted internal mythology, vampire superpowers, and all that sort of thing.
Or rather, that will happen in Breaking Dawn Part 2. This is Breaking Dawn Part 1, which is all about setup. After the moderately eventful third film, we're right back in the mode of the first one, i.e. nothing happens until the last 10 minutes or so. Well, okay, not completely nothing. In between what seems like an endless succession of scenes where Kristen Stewart stares expressionless into the camera during a middling emo rock ditty, the franchise takes a moment to undergo a dramatic shift in focus. See, up to this point, the Twilight Saga has largely been about blasting a tarted-up strain of teen abstinence message-mongering into the impressionable minds of its audience, but Breaking Dawn begins with Edward the Vampire and Bella the Invisible Personality getting married, thus sanctifying their conjugal union in the eyes of Vampire Jesus. So the franchise is forced to upgrade from abstinence propaganda to anti-abortion propaganda. See, Bella decides she wants to take a whack at sex before going full vampire, and because this is a Stephenie Meyer book, that's a desire she is immediately and violently punished for. But the experience leaves her knocked up with a bouncing baby daywalker whose rapid gestation period threatens to kill her. Edward pushes for a life-saving termination of the pregnancy, but Bella is instantly gung-ho about martyring herself in the name of the unborn. In case you were wondering, yes, this whole mess does include characters angrily correcting one another when someone calls it a fetus instead of baby. You'll never guess who wins. Given that the series has thus far been all about romanticizing Bella's submission of all free will and independent thought to a man, it's just kind of creepy that her first big act of defiance amounts to submitting even more of herself to yet another symbolic duty of the traditional surrendered good wife. In any case, Bella's freak baby is some kind of taboo to the werewolves, so they decide they have to kill the vampires. Jacob, the other man, remember him, doesn't want to, so he switches teams for the coming showdown. The scene where this occurs, which involves a dozen or so awful-looking CGI werewolves barking at each other while their human actors scream at each other in voiceover, is easily the most unintentionally hilarious thing you will see in a movie this year, and probably the most embarrassing thing Taylor Lautner has ever been part of in a movie. Keep in mind, Taylor Lautner began his movie career playing a half-man, half-shark who at one point rides on a giant cookie. Yeah, what you've heard about the finale being completely insane is true, though because it's a PG-13 movie with pretentious towards serious drama, it's all muted and tasteful, which is kind of a letdown. At this point, high camp would be the only thing that could make the series worth a damn. This was directed by Bill Condon, who's actually made decent movies before, but really phones it in here. It's all just as flat, drab, and TV movie-ish as the rest of the series. But, well, one more to go, and like I said, repellent propagandizing and irritating but dwindling fanbase aside, at this point it's just another bad movie chore. I had to see this, but I recommend you see anything else instead. You know what's actually pretty awesome? The Penguin movie. Go see the Penguin movie. And yeah, like I said, that was the last of the real episodes, the real reviews that I was able to recover of these. There was a full Breaking Dawn Part 2 video review. Have not been able to recover the original version of it. Did recover my original audio, so what we've done is turn that into an approximation of its original format, chopped out the recapping of the full plot of it, because at this point, who cares? It's no longer a spoiler thing, and got right to the meat of it, which is why the finale makes it a better thing, and almost redeems the series, and laid some fresh clips over it with some distortion effect, because that's what you have to do when using film clips on YouTube sometimes. So let's see how that goes, and here is the final review for the final part of Breaking Dawn Part 2. Hope you've enjoyed the compilation of Twilight review clips. Thank you for watching the Retro Reviews. More new content coming soon to the channel. You guys really need to see this movie for yourselves. They did it. It took 5 movies, but they did it. They finally figured out how to make this crap work. The biggest problem with the previous Twilight movies is that they were slavishly faithful to Stephenie Meyer's god-awful books for fear of offending the sensibilities of the bafflingly large number of fans who take her turgid, moralistic softcore seriously. I never tire of saying that you can make a good movie out of anything, but I also never tire of qualifying that statement with, but sometimes you have to rip out its guts to do so. The only way to make something remotely worthwhile out of any of the Twilight books would have been to go in recognizing that the source material sucks, turn all of its worst aspects up to 11, and just give the damn thing the opportunity to just be the colossal, astonishingly stupid joke that its author and its fanbase don't seem to realize that it is. And in Breaking Dawn Part 2, they finally did just that. Without apology or hesitation, it takes every single thing that makes Stephenie Meyer a terrible writer and Twilight a terrible series, the awful characters, the incompetent storytelling, the idiotic mythology, the inane plotting, the retrograde self-hating misogyny, all of it, blows it up to giant size and just lets it all come pouring out, and the end result is glorious. A slow-motion 50,000 clown car pileup of a disaster that's funnier, more entertaining, and more eminently fun than almost any other movie-going experience I've had this year. It would be impossible to make a parody of the Twilight Saga more hilarious than the fifth and final installment of the Twilight Saga. You see, this being an adaptation of the last third of a book, Breaking Dawn Part 2 is pretty much nothing but ending. Now, this, I kid you not, is how Breaking Dawn the book actually ends. Both teams of good and evil vampires line up for the big Braveheart-style brawl, each side containing a few dozen colorful, if one-dimensional and poorly written because, Stephenie Meyer, characters, each of whom has their own X-Men-style superpower in addition to vampire super strength. And then, just before the only thing close to awesome that has happened in the entire series has a chance to happen, Alice the good fortune-telling vampire shows up out of nowhere with a new character we have never met or heard one single reference to, who calmly explains to the bad guys that they have nothing to worry about. The bad guys go, "Oh, well, okay then," and go home. No, for real, that's it. That's the big climax to the entire Twilight series. There's almost a giant vampire war, but the bad guys go, "Oops, our bad," and leave. All the main characters survive, all the main relationships remain unchanged, the status quo is 100% preserved, and everyone gets a happy ending without any negative side effects or paying any price. Yeah. Remember what I said about how sometimes you just have to treat bad source material with complete and total disrespect? Well, here's how Breaking Dawn the movie decides to end. The bad guys decide they're just gonna kill everyone anyway because they're the bad guys. And we actually get the giant vampire fight. And guys, it's fucking amazing. Something like 30 to 50 characters, all of them with super strength and crazy magic powers, and dressed in hilariously awful "This Is What Country I'm From" costumes straight out of Epcot Center, beating the crap out of each other all at once. And since in Twilight you can only kill vampires by beheading them, that's what they keep doing. Except nobody brought a sword, so it's just tons of people ripping each other's heads off with their bare hands. Which apparently you can do now and keep your PG-13 because vampires don't have blood to spill. And they do mid-air kung fu and throw fireballs and lasers and force fields and lightning at each other. One dude punches the ground so hard it causes an earthquake that rips open a giant chasm full of lava. Fucking lava! And tons of the main characters die horribly. Good guys and bad guys. They feed Dakota Fanning to a giant wolf. If not for the entire third act of The Avengers, this movie, the fifth Twilight movie, would have the most awesome action scene of the entire year. But then it turns out it was all just a dream. No, I'm not joking. The big battle was imaginary. A psychic projection of what could happen used by Alice to scare the bad guys into giving up. They still bring out Deus Ex Machina guy, the villains still just up and leave, all the characters you thought you just saw get killed are still alive, and we ultimately get the exact same crappy ending from the book. Folks, I don't even know what to say. I was watching that battle mentally preparing to declare Breaking Dawn Part 2 a legitimately great movie, and then, I've gotten through a lot of bad movies by imagining a better movie. This is the first time I've seen a bad movie imagine a better version of itself. When this turnaround was revealed at my screening, a bunch of people in attendance spontaneously and without prompted shouted back at the screen, "Fuck you!" And I was one of them. But in a way, I guess it's kind of perfect. The rest of the movie is a goddamn riot because of how proudly terrible it is, so it's fitting that the film would not only undermine its only good part, but in the stupidest way possible. It's the cherry on the sundae of what might be one of the most inept, incomprehensibly bad series of films ever made. See, Breaking Dawn is the Twilight book where the most stuff happens, and the only thing more unintentionally hilarious than Stephenie Meyer writing about nothing is Stephenie Meyer trying to write about something. The first act reveal of superhuman vampire extrovert Kristen Stewart is without a doubt one of the most embarrassing stretches of film any actress has ever been put through. Breaking Dawn Part 2, my hand to God, is a complete freaking blast and some of the most fun I've had in a movie all year. For completely opposite reasons than the filmmakers intended, to be sure. I'm basically encouraging you to go point and laugh as a bunch of people's sincere attempts to make a good movie completely fall apart in front of your eyes. Make no mistake, but I'm sorry, fun is fun.